Hey everyone, Johnny here from Tabletop Tutorial Games, and today we're going to do a one-day sculpt for you. I've been working on one of these pledge manager buildings here that's been popular. It's the Storehouse, which is a thatch building, 2 components, and I'm working on this top component here. One of the things that needs to be sculpted is, this is just a suggestion of a figurehead for a ship at the moment, and we're going to find that character today in the sculpture. In the same way that I've been doing the other stretch goals, which are these stone carved totems and statues. These are going to shrink down to about this big to make it look like a miniature of this size and detail. His hand chiseled them out of stone, so obviously getting the detail at this level and then shrinking that down is going to look good with all of your miniatures and your gaming setup. Today we're going to focus on sketching, making the armature, putting the clay together and sculpting in those last details. Okay, so first thing first, we're going to sketch it. Often I'll just start sculpting and find the character in the sculpt, but for those of you that want to sketch first, let's focus on that step. Everything I'm trying to capture here is sort of, you know, sailing themed, so if we're going to do some sort of dragony creature, let's make it a fishy sort of sea themed creature, I guess. Again, you don't need to commit very much to this. The looser the better. This is just going to start you off sculpting a lot faster. There we go. That's again, quick as you can. You know, you're not submitting this into any folio. This is all it needs to be. But that gives me enough to figure out what armature I'm going to do and where I can start piling the clay. Okay, next bit is the armature base. So get rid of the paper. You're going to need a drill. That drill bit is specifically to the diameter of this piece of aluminium armature wire. It's totally bendable, you can do all sorts of that. You're going to need a piece of wood, right? You've got to have some space around where your sculpture is going to be in case you mold it. I'm not sure we will, but anyway, if you do cut a piece of wood, give the edges a light sanding because your wrists are going to be brushing up against that a lot as you sculpt. Okay, so we've put the pole in the hole and we've put a little bit of glue around that, and then around that we have used this plumber's epoxy, which you want to use gloves with. Mush that up, make a little bit of a ant hill around that, and this is going to dry almost steel hard because you're going to be putting a lot of weight and pressure on this while you sculpt. And so while that's setting, we are going to make a little tray of plasticine nibbles. You get this stuff. This is what I use, it's my favorite. NSP medium sulfur-free plasticine by Sculpt. So save your poor thumbs on, because it's quite hard even though it's medium. Some hard stuff. How am I going to sculpt with that? You want to save your thumbs, so we're going to heat this up, we're going to stick it in the oven. But to get the pieces small enough in the oven so that they kind of heat uniformly through, all you're going to do, use I call it a floor scraper because it's what I use it most for, but I guess this is some kind of scraper or chisel. You can use whatever suits you. There you go. Stick a big plate of that and we'll take this to the oven. Okay, so this has been in the oven for about 10 minutes on about 80 degrees. You don't want it to melt completely, everyone's oven's different. You can see how much softer that is to knead as opposed to this. While that's kind of cooling down a little bit and still soft, we're going to find this shape in this thing, so that goes okay. Everyone can roll a sausage.com, and then we are going to just start squishing said sausage up the plasticine, no, up the, what do you call it, the aluminium armature roll. Kind of a sausage monster. There's no detail, and again no skill required to do this. Okay, so now I have the very basic shape. You can see this is all that you need to get it up to. Now we're going to get a scraper. You can use either one of these. Now we are just going to go down the sides here. I am doing this because I'm basically trying to get a feeling for the piece of wood that the original carver would have been set in front of. Once this is scanned and printed out and shrunk down, it's going to fit into the central beam of what I've started here on this unfinished sculpture of the hut that it's going to go on. Okay, now we're going to start kind of pushing and pulling, adding and cutting away into this block here to find the same shapes I've captured in the quick illustration. The tool I'm using is just a little steel poker. You can use anything from a scalpel to a pencil, whatever you're comfortable with, just dragging in and drawing in some shapes. Sometimes you might even want to draw into this, just like you draw on the illustration. I've got this up to basically a gingerbread level quality of sculpture. We're just capturing the raw mass of which we're going to push and pull into. So we throw this down, we're going to pick up a tool like this. This is just a wound up piece of wire that is stuck into a copper tube, but that wound up wire is going to end up working as a rake. Okay, it's looking pretty good. This is the first pass with this bigger rake. I'm going to move on to the smaller, more subtle, refined rake, which I've actually made in the same way, but instead of a wire, I've used a bass guitar string. The little nubules are softer. And for those of you interested in making your own tools, we're going to be showing the process of that in the Hagglethorn Hollow book, but don't worry, you can, for now, pick up many tools like this online, but I just have a very specific idea of what I want to achieve, so I've ended up making my own. It's all about just smoothing this whole cookie cutter shape out into something that we know looks the same on both sides. So when we start drawing in our shapes and our character into this that we're going to start carving out, we've got a pretty good feeling that it's going to look symmetrical on both sides. Okay, that's smoothed out, and now we're going to try and capture a little bit more of what's happening here now that this is making sense and the bigger shapes are refined.
A spike in me Watsits, fanning out from the back of its neckery hoodah.
Okay, so here's the spiky bits in the back, and now let's slap on a bit of mass we're going to need for the jaw. Just drawing in where that jaw's going. You can give yourself kind of like a guideline here. So bear that in mind, you can't actually make a mistake when you're sculpting. You can just, you basically just, without fail, keep getting better at what you're doing because you're learning as you go. And you can always, especially with plasticine, which is an oil-based clay and doesn't dry or harden, you can just keep pushing and pulling until you've got what you want. And you learn the whole time you're doing it. And again, now that that mass is on there, just gonna work that in a little bit. So there's no gaps or bubbles, no little pockets of air. Just push that in there. And now that that's like that, we just go back to exactly the same steps we had using the bigger rake, and then I'll go down to the smaller rake, and we're going to get this to the smooth mass we had before, just with a bit more detail. There we go, look at that. So now we've got it there, we are going to bring out my friend and yours, isopropyl alcohol. Don't drink it unless you're desperate. And now I have a brush. Here is a watercolor brush that I have used a craft knife to halve, or cut half the bristles off so this becomes a bit firmer. And dip, dip, dip. We're just going to paint this on, and the brush, the bristles now basically work as the next level of fine raking tool, with the isopropyl alcohol pushing back all these last rake marks until it becomes perfectly smooth. Alright, that'll do. Next, we're gonna light the thing on fire. Now we're just gonna, okay, just get it nice and smooth. Burn all that isopropyl alcohol off. make this look like a nice toy from the 80s. Okay, and a couple of steps in, and this is now our canvas to work from. As you can see, there is a lot to go to get it to this, but we're in a pretty fun place to start drawing in and carving in some detail of finding this character's face in a block that we're very quickly and easily put together. Okay, so you haven't done all of the detail. I'm just getting the basic lines to start forming the bigger shapes that are popping out. I'm going to refine these now with this tool, and then we're going to kind of repeat the process we've seen so far, and then just start working up the detail. So with this tool, it's a very small wire that's been turned into a little loop. And with this, I can start basically scalloping out my line work, like so. And then with a same thing again, a wire loop tool that's a bit thicker, we can start working away from that line that we've drawn and carved. Okay, so now with this rough loop, we've roughly smoothed that out a bit, and we're going to do the exact same process again now. So we take the crude old big Mr. Rake, and we're just going to make sure everything flows much more naturally. And over that again, we're going to go back with the smaller bass guitar string rake, just like we did the first time, and we're going to get this to a symmetrical, smooth place before we start adding in the eyes and the brow and some bigger teeth. Alright, so we're starting to find the bones of this character. Now we're going to start putting on the meat, I guess. I feel like it needs a bit more forehead, maybe another fin, so I'm going to work on that. I'm going to build out the eyeball, the brow, and the cheekbone. Maybe kind of round off and fatten up some of these teeth so they stick out a bit more. And we're going to go over all this mess we've built up now and just rake everything so it flows into the sculpture as one piece. And a good way to do that is often by cross-hatching. When you are using isopropyl alcohol, again, it's a sculpting tool, so you can brush with the flow of the sculpture and go against the rake marks that you've created, and you can really get in these cracks by wiggling it around. Again, this is a sawn off watercolor paintbrush. Sounds like something you're gonna rob a bank with. It's kind of like a stylus on Photoshop, where the harder you push, it's gonna leave something softer, but you may start affecting the sculpt under it, but at this stage that's not important. All we're looking for now is blending all of these shapes together, smoothing it out, and we're going to take a heat torch to it, and we're going to end up with that 80s plastic toy look we're after, to start putting in the final carved details before we move on to the last detail phase, which is carving in all of the striation of tree bark and you know, the grain of the wood. And there's wood grain and there's wood grain. So there's grain which you can carve and it looks like it's brand new, but we want to make this look like an ancient sea salt weathered, sun dried, aged carving from 100 years ago. Okay, usually you'd leave that for 10 or 15 minutes for all that isopropyl alcohol to naturally Drain off, because otherwise it's going to catch on fire like that. But it is a dragon, and it blows out pretty easily. Be aware if you are doing this with a beard to not get too close, because your face is going to go up and you're going to look like Gary Oldman and Hannibal, but instant 80s plastic toy. Okay, so now we have a very rough basic shape of a sculpture to go with a very rough basic sketch, and we are going to be going back to the stage we were before, where we use this little guy, and we are going to start basically drawing onto this just like I drew onto this piece of paper for a sketch. You can start to see this character coming out now. I've drawn on it just like I would draw on a piece of paper, except I've needled it in with a needle. And what stands now is we get the smaller loop tool we've talked about before. And just like previously, we use these grooves as guidelines to where we're going to start sculpting and carving and massaging out the shapes we've found in these lines. Okay, so that is looking okay. We've started finding the shapes, carving back from the lines that we've drawn in there, and rather than actually smooth this out and refine some of those shapes, we're gonna treat all of these little chisel marks that have come out of this little tool. We're gonna treat those like the carpenter's chisel, and we're not gonna do any more to this. We're gonna go straight into wood grain, which is just taking the same tool that you used to draw the stuff in, and we're going to start grinding in, carving in, scraping in, drawing in, whatever you want to call it, basically wood grain, treating this like the wood grain of a tree. All of this wood grain is going to go up like it's been carved out of one branch, and just like we're drawing the wood grain on a tree, we're going to draw it straight onto the plasticine sculpt in 3 dimensions. Okay, it's that simple. Just scrape up some vertical lines, maybe play around with a shape or two, and it doesn't look like much now, but the isopropyl alcohol is going to blend that all in together. We're going to do this over the whole thing, going against the grain. That's looking just about right. We're going to leave this to dry for about 5 minutes, however long it takes, because we don't want this to explode into flame like the last one, because we're going to start losing detail now, which is why we'll also be going down to, I call it the creme brulee torch. I mean, I think it's for soldering and electricians and all sorts, but we're going to be using the much more isolated flame as opposed to the flamethrower, and we can directionally aim this, get it at all the bits we want, and avoid overheating and melting the plasticine, and you're going to see what great effect that does once this dries. Okay, so this is dry enough. I'm going to turn this guy on. We're going to get this little directional flame. I'm going to very slowly heat up and cover every area. And this smooths off your shapes. It kind of rounds off everything, and it pops those cracks, that wood grain you've sculpted in there. Kind of frames those nicer, and it also very quickly burns off all the little balls of plasticine that have accumulated, and they disappear. So it's also kind of a quick way to do a cleanup, make it look like you've done more work than you have in some ways. And again, this is going to be shrinking down to 1/3 of its size once we scan and 3D print it to stick on the building. So the bigger and more loud some of these details are, the better they're going to look when it's shrunk down. You can hear the gas turned off and the flame is out before you put it on the table. And yeah, voila, we've got a really kind of rough hewn piece of carved wood there. One thing I'm looking at this, I want to add are the eyes. Break out your isopropyl again. This is true for any detail you want to add to this after you've got to this stage. If you want to pop some of the depth of the crack in the mouth or the nostrils or anything like that, it's plasticine. You keep going back and forth as much as you like. And this is about the level I need to get this to in order to scan it and then 3D print it to about 1/3 of its size. Here's a size reference for what that's going to be, because we're going to plug this in to this work in progress Fisherman's Storehouse that I've been sculpting for the Hagglethorne Hollow series. And once smaller, all of these details are really going to pop and make it feel to scale with this cool boathouse thing we're building up. And if you're, obviously we have just done a whirlwind sort of hint at some of the processes I use to sculpt the world of Hagglethorne Hollow, but if you'd like a much more in-depth view on that, we are documenting the entire process of this entire building from the floorboards up in the Art of Hagglethorne Hollow book, which is available from this site, which will be just below the video in the header there. Otherwise, we hope you got something out of the video, learned something, or had fun watching, and thanks for being part of it.